guys, what's up? This is another episode of the McAllister Hours podcast. I'm your host, as always, Cole McAllister. Another solo episode today, just coming off our first guest episode last week with Jason Bonnell. Despite, my apparent obvious lack of having interviewed a guest in a while, I thought it was a very insightful conversation. Jason's a really smart guy, so please check that episode out if you have not yet. Because that episode's so much better than the one you're about to listen to. No, I don't know. But yeah, I just thought it'd be nice to kind of break it up with another episode where, I ramble and talk about, some things that have been going on recently in the last couple weeks that I thought were kind of interesting, that I thought, were relevant to, what I do and what I'm interested in, what the audience is interested in. So the first big thing that I wanted to talk about, things have been kind of weird lately in the last month. There's been kind of just in the world of podcasting. There's been kind of a shakeup. There's been kind of a stir up. I think a lot of it, all of it really. The real big thing is this Joe Rogan guest that apparently I don't know about even necessarily a serial killer. I guess I don't know I didn't listen to the episode. I don't really know what his background is. If he had killed before. There's at least one murder under this guy's docket. I would not be surprised if there are others. But this man by the name of Sheldon Johnson, who appeared on the Joe Rogan episode in February of this year, about only shy of a month ago, has recently been arrested with, I think, when was this? March 8th, so a couple weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago. Shortly after appearing on that podcast, was arrested. They did a welfare check on this guy, and they found the torso of a body in his refrigerator. Which is just astounding, right? And there's something kind of funny, none of this is really funny, right? But there is something kind of humorous in the fact that this guy got busted on a welfare check, right? Like this guy clearly, and that's like a really big thing. If you look at people who are like are killers and murderers and do like engage in this kind of behavior, like they're really not like that cognitively bright most of the time. Like there's obviously some kind of like disconnect, and like Jeffrey Dahmer, for example, was like, he was like completely disorganized and like his apartment reeked. Like he was not like, good at what he did. Right. No, that's good, but you know what I mean? Like skilled in like hiding, being able to hide the fact that you're killing people. Right. So the fact that, this guy just got out of prison, like he's still on, obviously he was on some kind of probation or whatever, some probationary period or whatever. And the fact that he just got busted in with this thing in his fridge, on a Tuesday night. And then of course they arrested him upon, him turning up. But I need to look up who the other guy was, because I can't remember. But because there's a couple interesting things to this, right? Josh Dubin was the guy who brought him on, the Joe Rogan experience. And there are a couple different things and I guess, okay, let me say this first. I guess the reason that I thought this would be interesting to talk about, is not really because like I'm trying to stir drama or anything, or that I'm even like a JRE fanboy. I've said a lot of times that I think he like a lot of people, he really, inspired me to start podcasting. I think he's indisputably the GOAT. The industry would not be where it is today without him. I think regardless of how you feel about him, I think that is an undeniable fact. I think, so, I think when something like this happens, it's worth talking about. It's like anytime there's some big thing that happens, right? And it pertains to podcast. It's almost like a lesson in podcasting, right? a lesson in like, if you're gonna like interview people, if you're gonna give them a platform, if you're gonna like, because I mean, look, whether you like it or not, unless you in the interview conduct yourself in a certain manner, I mean, if you give somebody a platform, you are in a sense giving them some form of credence, right? I mean, like, for the reason that like I wouldn't, if there was like a schizophrenic downtown in Des Moines, I wouldn't like invite him into my home and have him on the podcast, right? I mean, not even for like a safety precaution, but just because there's only so much there that you can really gain from that conversation, right? In matters of truth. And I'm not necessarily comparing Sheldon Johnson to a schizophrenic. Clearly the man is mentally ill severely if you're able to do that to someone. But I do think it's fair to say that it's something like, this is a lesson in podcasting. This is something that people should keep in mind, is like what happens when you have people on your podcast. And this is something that I can personally pull from, right? Not that I've interviewed anybody that's a killer as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know anyways. Wouldn't that be so funny? This episode comes out and somebody just comments, yeah, man, I forgot to mention, this happened. I don't think I've had anybody in the podcast that killed, like, even killed anyone in self-defense. I don't think, as far as I know anyways. I guess here's the question. Do I think that like Joe Rogan is responsible per se, or like it holds any fault for this? Not really. I don't really give Joe Rogan. I think in this situation, there just kind of seemed to be a shield. And not that gives Joe Rogan like any like all immunity in this situation, right? Like, he's still somewhat, I don't even want to say liable, but like, if you were to look at this and be like, hey, this is kind of like in a ways a little bit at least weird, if not maybe a tiny bit scummy, even if not intentional, that this guy really like got this kind of platform, like as big of a platform as Joe Rogan, right? And then proceeded to murder someone. I don't believe that he shouldn't have gotten that. Like, I believe in free speech. I think, even someone like this, you could find value in having a conversation. But I mean, clearly this podcast happened before the event, right? So, I mean, it's not like there would be any insight, right? Any necessarily direct insight on that, right? I think, clearly the person who really looks bad in this situation, clearly Sheldon Johnson, because this is just a despicable human being. Next to an animal. Probably less than an animal, really, if you're able to do that to something or somebody, I should say. But for just Josh Dubin, who I've never listened to an episode of his. But he frequent guest on the Joe Rogan Experience. I would not be surprised if this affects that relationship. I'm sure it affects Joe Rogan's perception of him, and the public's perception of him, right? So I just think it's kind of interesting. Like I said, I don't think Rogan is like in the wrong here by any means, but I do think it's, like I said, this is a lesson. This is something that when people are like just freely interviewing people, like, keep this in mind. Like, this is something that, like, 2 years ago, I could have easily interviewed a serial killer and would have had no idea, right? Because there's something when you're just like an interview-based platform, it's kind of the regular rigmarole. You do it so much, you're not really doing, like, I never did any fucking kind of screening or anything like that. Like, I probably should have in a lot of cases. They're probably, who knows? Like, I've had guests on that have like kind of come through like later on. I've heard things where it's like they were involved in something, and I never took those interviews down because I believe I'm a believer in free speech. I'm a believer in if there's information said on a podcast, even if the person who you're interviewing isn't like a great person, has done bad things, I still think that conversation has merit in some form. And I don't think that just taking it down for allegations or whatever, I don't think that's necessarily warranted in that case. I don't see how the two are related, I guess, especially if it's after the fact. So I guess I just kind of want to share my thoughts on that. And this is kind of interesting. I actually wanted to talk about two different things that have recently happened in the Joe Rogan Experience. This, and then there was recently an interview with a guest by the name of Jonathan Haidt, who I highly recommend everybody go check out. He wrote a book called The Righteous Mind, which I to this day credit as a big part of the reason why I became atheist, why I kind of discovered. Basically what The Righteous Mind talks about is it talks about morality and religion and where all these things come from, and it really kind of paints things like in a way where you kind of can just like see it all laid out, like all the religions, all the trains of thought that go around that. You can really kind of just see it laid out in front of you in a way that kind of just makes you think, okay, maybe this is more just has to do with the human condition versus any deity or whatever. And it's kind of funny because my mother actually got this book for me. And I don't know if I don't think I've ever told her or really intend to tell her that, that book played a huge role in me not even believing in just my thought process and how I view and perceive the world today. But anyways, the author of that book, Jonathan Haidt, he recently appeared on a Joe Rogan podcast. I think like Wednesday or Tuesday of this previous week. And he I don't remember what the book is called that he's coming out. Let me look at that up actually again. His new book, The Anxious Generation, yes. And it's kind of interesting because there's another, I don't know if I actually talked about this on the podcast. I don't think I did. But there's another author, Abigail Shrier, who is very controversial, I know. She wrote the book Irreversible Damage, talking about kind of the trend of all these, a spectrum-y young girls kind of all coming out as trans, like in unison, in groups, and kind of just talking about this phenomenon. I didn't read the whole book. I read a little bit of it. I did think it was a very interesting premise and definitely something to be explored. However, she came out with a new book, Bad Therapy, which basically blamed all these problems with these anxious kids, the same problem that Jonathan Haidt talks about in The Anxious Generation. But she she really, I feel like, glosses over what Jonathan talks about, and focuses more on like I said, like the book is called Bad Therapy, talking about how therapists like cause all of these problems. And I haven't read her book. I listened to her podcast. I really just disagree with her premise on that. She makes some fair points, but I think she's ignoring the big part of the picture, which is what Jonathan Haidt's talking about, which is, I don't think it takes a microscope to, uncover the idea that, like, these kids are having such a hard time emotionally, with their overexposure to the internet. Women especially due to like the image of the female body that's promoted on social media, which is just, very reminiscent of porn and like just unrealistic, and how negatively that's affecting things. I don't think he talks about porn really too much, at least not in the podcast I listened to. But I did think it was an interesting podcast. I think he talks about, he gives a lot of like interesting anecdotes and a lot of things that really make you kind of, as educated as you can be about it. Like it's always just interesting to hear about those different kind of things, right? How it affects the statistics behind that, like the different ways it affects kids, all that kind of thing. I think it's interesting. However, there was something that, like, while listening to this podcast, just really kind of irritated me, especially being like, an anarcho-capitalist, someone who really just does not want I don't want my government interfering, right? I don't want that interfering in people's lives. I think, even when it comes to something like bad parenting or like kids that are just like not, doing well or just coping well, like I just don't think that like any government entity can really help that situation. I think they can put a lot of, Band-Aid type of, they can inflate money and throw money at them, but that's only going to last for so long, et cetera, et cetera. So anyways, it was very disappointing. But I guess here's my point with my objection to his answer, right? I guess here's my point. Going back to like the religious aspect, right? You'll have the first point of the argument that makes a lot of sense, but then the back end will be, okay, but you just need God, and God this, God that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really frustrating when you see that happen, right? When you see an argument that's like a half argument. Like, here's another really good example. Brett Weinstein, I should say. Brett Weinstein and Heather Haidt, a married couple. They run a podcast that I was really into for a while, called the Dark Horse Podcast. They wrote a book called I don't remember what the front title was. Let me look that one up too. Brett Weinstein. The evolution. A hunter-gatherer's guide to the 21st century evolution and the challenges of modern life. Which is a very good book. It had a lot of very interesting anecdotes. It had a lot of really cool things to say. And in terms of like, it was a really big book around COVID, and the kind of subject matter that it was talking about in that time really related to the current events. So I really enjoyed it. But I mean, that was another very good example of that kind of thing happening, right? Where you have just half an argument. Like the first half of the argument was really good. They're like, these are all the ways that like we've evolved in a really reckless way, in a really poor way, in a way that's like we're almost going beyond our biology, right? Like the challenges that we have compared to our ancestors are just insignificant. Like we're almost like kind of thrashing against a cage, like not really like internally evolutionary. We're like thrashing in a cage. We don't even really know what to do. Right. But then his end argument was we need to actually devolve. The steps are not to just keep going forward and see what happens, but to actually make this surprisingly really like conservative effort to like just really try to tone things back. And in a way, Jonathan Haidt's doing the same thing with technology. He's proposing that we, have all these government, and to be fair, he even acknowledges the libertarian point, right? And he says like, it's not really good for government to get interfered, but he has the fallacy that everyone has, right? Where it's like, this problem is so great that we have no choice other than to give it to government, to just give government the problem and just give it to them to solve. And there was something about his argument that just really upset me. Not even upset me. It was just like, it just sucks when you hear someone that's really smart just kind of make an argument that's just kind of, I just don't agree with. Like, I can just see the fallacy in that, right? Like, not even the fallacy, but like the moral fallacy, like, just the underlying principle, like at the end of the day, you just don't have a right, in my mind, to like just impose your values on other people. You may think technology is really harmful, and in a lot of cases it probably is, but there could be cases that you don't know of where there's actually younger people who are actually thriving because of social media. Like maybe they're learning a bunch of different skills that generations before them would have never learned, and they could have a fantastic career with endless opportunities for that because of their exposure to social media. That's a possibility. That's something that could happen. So even in a case like this, to say that like we're just going to put an overarching hand, the invisible hand, as they say, of government, right? We're just going to come in and we're just going to correct this, quote unquote. It's an unrealistic goal. It's a thing that cannot be achieved. And this is just the fallacy that all these people fall into when they say we're going to have government mandate solve A, B, C. It just doesn't work. I just don't believe it can work. So it was disappointing to hear this. And that's okay. I still think that like he's a very smart person. I highly recommend everybody go check that podcast out. But okay, so I guess this is my final thought on that point, right? What really needs to happen is not like a government initiative. What needs to happen is these parents need to fucking get this shit under control. they really need to like limit the exposure to technology in their kids. Even if they get made fun of for it, right? And that's kind of, that's kind of part of why I don't even know if I want to have kids. I'm fairly certain I don't want to have kids, right? Is there is a social pressure that you kind of have to adhere to, especially in this day and age, where if you send your kid to school with a flip phone, everybody has a smartphone, you're going to get made fun of for that shit. That's what I had growing up, right? So to look at like, oh, you have like, that'd be like me carrying around a Walkman and everybody had an iPod. I got shit for that that's something I literally did growing up, and I got shit for that all the time. So that's a really hard thing to combat as a parent, right? But at the end of the day, it's not an excuse. Like if you're gonna if you're just gonna like let your kids run wild on the internet and technology, and there's gonna be consequences to that, right? Like not even like in terms of this, but like pornography, and there's just right. Really, what it needs to come down to is a case by case basis. These parents really need to just like the parents need to take control. That's the only way, and there are going to be parents that are not going to do that, and that's very sad. But to put this Band-Aid solution on, to not have a real solution, instead of just letting things play out as they are, letting nature play out as it is. I think if people thought of humanity as more of a naturistic thing, as a thing where, there are people that need to just fall to the wayside. It sounds like really fucked up saying that, but I think if you want to have a realistic view in society, that's the way to look at it. If you have this like cushy fantasy where you think you can just have government come in and make people's lives better, it's unrealistic. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry, people. It's just not. I don't know. There's an entire fucking train of thought in literature and all that I'm not even going to get into right now. But I've talked about it a million times. I guess at the end of the day, I really urge parents to take control. Also, like this, look, to be fair, I'm not a parent, right? But I do see a lot of danger in people taking so many pictures of their children. I think even like the exposure to a camera lens on a phone, I think that's going to have a real psychological impact on the future generations in a way that I don't think it's going to really be good. I think that it could lead to a lot of egotism or just a disconnect from reality or whatever, right? I urge parents to like really kind of moderate that. Obviously, you want to take pictures and like have memories and stuff. That makes sense. But even just like the difference between like, having your own personal photo library and like putting it on the internet. Like those are two completely different things, right? Like those will have different effects. Ultimately even just like limiting pictures in general, right? I think those are all good things, good practices that people could do. But anyways, okay, that's social rant done. I want to talk about a couple other things too. A couple more media related things. The first one, I don't know if this recently dropped or if here, let me actually, God, I'm not pulling anything up today. The Alien Romulus trailer. Let's see when this dropped. 4 days ago it dropped. This teaser for the upcoming film. Directed by, let me get his name right. Fede or Fede. I don't know if it's Fede or Fede. Alvarez, who did the Evil Dead remake, which was a fantastic revival of that series, and I loved it. It was probably one of the best horror reboots ever created. And he also did Don't Breathe, which is a very clever film. And had, really, we reviewed it on Guts and Gore. I think I gave it like a 9.3 out of 10 or something like that. It's just a fantastic, like completely unique and original and really, had like the opposite, really, subverted expectations. So the man who directed these films is directing the new Alien, which I fucking love. The teaser looks, it's honestly very reminiscent of the video game, Alien Isolation, which, is worth the playthrough. Definitely, it's definitely an experience. Also, one of my least favorite games of all time. I was so fucking pissed. That game gave me more rage than anything in my life. Somehow I made it through. I think I probably cheated somehow. Excuse me, to get through it. But I'm very excited for this. I'm very excited for this film. The trailer looks either like visually it looks spot on with the universe, but like also it's the continuity of the universe is there, and it's also just like really refreshing and really new, right? It does a very good job of like towing the line in that way. Like I said, this man did a really great job revitalizing the Evil Dead series, which, that was Sam Raimi's baby. It was kind of the whole idea that could even be good was shocking in itself. And that movie just his first two movies have just over delivered. So I'm super excited to see that happen to the Alien franchise. I think Aliens is like one of the best fucking sci-fi movies ever made. It's so fucking good. It's intense. Aliens a little disappointing. Kind of part of why I think Ridley Scott's really overrated in a lot of instances, but I think he might be produced. Yeah, so Ridley Scott is a producer on this, but I'm okay. I'm okay with Ridley Scott producing. He's a good big picture guy. I'll give him that. He's a good big picture guy. He does good when he produces. When he's just like, okay, let's just do this, like an overarching idea. And then I'll hire somebody to direct it, do a good job directing. I can't talk. Really, the only movie that he did that was any good was Blade Runner, and that took like 3 fucking times for him to edit before it was really good. So, I think he's massively overrated. But Fede Alvarez is not overrated. He's a very great director, and the fact that he's helming this project is fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to really reboot the franchise. I know they've like had a couple, Ridley Scott's done a couple the last few years, but I saw, I don't remember what it was. I saw the one from like 2013, Prometheus. I saw Prometheus. I thought that was kind of just okay. It was all right, but it was kind of just, it was boring, and I didn't really think it did a lot for the franchise. Okay, last thing before we wrap this podcast up, a new Kendrick Lamar feature on a Future track. I'm not really a huge Future fan, I won't lie, but I had to listen. I had to listen for the Kendrick diss. And I just thought I'd share my thoughts on that track. I listened to it twice this morning. I wasn't even aware of this. I wasn't even gonna talk about it in the episode, but I was on Facebook, and a good friend of mine, Obbs, who actually next week we're gonna have an interview dropping with him. So stay tuned for that. It was a good time, as always. But he was talking about Facebook about this track and saying that, it was actually very clever. It was very genius in a lot of ways. And I don't know. I think I respectfully disagree. Basically, the diss track, it was talking a lot about J. Cole, talked a lot about Drake, which Drake is Drake. I don't... I will hop on a diss track about Drake any fucking day, dude. He had one good album. Nothing Was the Same. And even that was kind of just okay. It wasn't really like amazing. I enjoyed it when I was growing up, and then it doesn't really age that well. You're like, okay, it's all right. But and then he dissed J. Cole, which that was surprising, because it's sad that that relationship has fallen out, because they really made some good stuff back in the old heyday. Has J. Cole really continued to live up to what he was back then? I don't know. The project with the burning basketball hoop, I don't know. I don't remember what it was called. I really like that album. I thought I can see how like his music is can get repetitive in a lot of ways. It can, definitely, but I think Kendrick's music can sometimes get a little repetitive too. And this feature kind of seemed like that a little bit. I couldn't even really tell he was dissing those two. I had to look it up. Even though listening to it twice, I was like, who's he really dissing here? And maybe that's just my ignorance. Like, that's very possible and probable. But I just thought it was really interesting that that this happened. And it's kind of interesting to kind of see where Kendrick Lamar's career is at this point. And I kind of wonder, and this is a hot take. I kind of wonder if we're starting to see the back end of Kendrick's quality. I do. Look, I think his last album that dropped was, we talked about it at length on the podcast, very heavily centered around sex addiction and his struggle with that and coming to terms with that. And look, I'm not going to lie. It's a double-edged sword in a way, right? Because like people getting sober and getting better is a good thing. Like ultimately at the end of the day, you want that. Like even if it does the thing which I'm making the argument for, which is that it kind of can like, excuse me, it can kind of sacrifice the quality of your art in a way, right? Like I think there's something like when you're kind of stewing in like drugs or your addiction or whatever, like despite all the negative parts of that, there can really be a lot of, you can still get a lot of positive music experiences out of that. I think that eventually runs out naturally. I think that's why people get sober, and then their artistic careers kind of take this lull, right? It's not even really bad, but it's just not the quality. It's not to what it was. It's like comparing High Hopes, whatever that album was that had High Hopes on. I think it was called High Hopes. Comparing that to Dark Side of the Moon, right? Like there's a lull there, right? There's like where you're like in the middle of fucking acid and doing whatever. I don't think even Pink Floyd was that big on it, but like, Syd Barrett was, I guess. Syd Barrett was a big acid head. But I think you could even argue that like someone like that had like really good music when they were in the fucking vein of it, right? When they were in the whole fucking drug thing or their addiction, right? And even though it's positive that they get out of that, there's something that's kind of always going to be missing in that. And my point is, I kind of wonder if Kendrick's on this same track. Like if we are kind of just really seeing like, this is kind of just, it's like, it's just kind of like the same old Kendrick, right? Like, okay, he's kind of just, I don't know. I listened to the verse twice. I didn't think it was like super impressive. It was fine. It was okay. It was kind of catchy. Part of that could have just been the fact that I'm not really a fan of Future. And I think he's kind of out of place on a track like that anyways. I mean, I know they've collabed in the past, but I don't know. So excuse me. I'm so sorry. That's so bad for the. I hate when I'm going on a roll talking and then I just get all this dead space and fucking. Look, I'm a chain smoker over here. I might as well have a cigarette in my hand. So yeah, you can disagree with me on the comments. Obviously, Kendrick's still, he's still fucking one of the greats. I think he's created some fantastic pieces of music, both on like a single aspect and on an album aspect. To Pimp Butterfly is arguably the greatest rap album of all time. I think if anything, it's like one of the best representations of like, being a black man in America, and not even in America, but just as a whole, right? Because I know so much about that. But I can appreciate when I listen to that album, I can really appreciate where he's coming from, and I think there's a lot to say in that. So look, I'm not even like throwing shade at Kendrick. People are gonna listen to this thing. I'm throwing shade at Kendrick. Look, the man's still one of the greats. But like, look, if I were to like criticize Eminem's rap career currently, right? I don't think that's an inaccurate criticism. Like, is Eminem anything like he was back in the 90s or the early 2000s? No, not even remotely. And you know why? Probably because he's sober. And again, it's great that he's sober. It's good that like he's not fucking drowning in misery and that he's probably happier and that he's, not fucking throwing his life, not killing himself, right? Like, that's good. But there's also going to be a difference in quality there. So anyways, that's my spiel for today. That's the episode. The Thanks for tuning in as always. Check out this week. We got a full docket. I know it's look, I started this new job. It's really hard for me to fucking keep up 3 episodes a week. So I appreciate everybody for being patient and still, understanding, maybe I don't put out an episode of one podcast to the other one week, but we got plenty of content. We got plenty of things that you can listen back on. So go check out the Unhinged Uncensored every Tuesday at 2 p.m. We got another guest coming up on that. And check out the Guts and Gore podcast this Thursday at 2 p.m. Where we're going to review yet another horror film. This week it was a little dismal, I'm not going to lie, the quality of the film. But that's always fun to talk about too, because then we can just tear it apart and, have a fun time with that. So, all right, guys, have a good night. Enjoy yourselves. Peace.